There is no Lincoln the Great or Patton the Great. It is that rarest of all historical titles, lusted after and fought for, yet seldom given to the kings of the earth. The title great is reserved in history for those people who, though perhaps not great in the sense of morality, are simply larger than life, huge personalities on the stage of human history. In the bitterest of historical ironies, the only monarch in Israel's history to be called great was Herod, a consummate psychopath whose reign was a veritable bloodbath, not of glorious conquest, but of heinous murder. Herod the Great killed so many of his own family that the Emperor Augustus joked that it was better to be Herod's pig than his son. Yet Herod's greatness, such as it was, derived from architecture, not glory in battle. He was a great builder of structures, including the famed temple in Jerusalem, but he was also a horrendous destroyer of lives. Nevertheless, he is to this day called Herod the Great. The only king of Israel who merited the honor of being called the Great was not the maniacal Herod, to be sure, but a complex and controversial man who predated Herod by 1,000 years, David of Bethlehem. Even those dismissive of the Bible cannot deny that David is among the most famous names in world literature. Were David nothing but a myth, his story would still be the stuff of the greatest of legends. Giant slayer, warrior chieftain, outlaw, mercenary, lover, poet, musician, and sometime prophet, David is great by any measure. Sculpted, painted, debated, denounced, and denied, David is the greatest of all Israel's rulers. Among the kings of his own or any other age, hardly a man like David exists. He is considered the true father of his nation, though Saul was its first king. One cannot fully understand the history of Israel, nor have a true sense of the Bible as a whole story, without David. Still, some might be hesitant to utter the phrase, David the Great, and understandably so. For every Goliath in the story of David, there is a Bathsheba around the corner. For every soul to whom he showed compassion, there were 100 he was personally responsible for slaughtering. He had many wives, yet his palace was also filled with concubines. He had a different woman for every night of the week. During one lengthy period, David was an outlaw who ran what can only be called a protection racket. Later he was a mercenary raider who sold his skills to his people's adversaries. He was dreaded by his enemies not only for killing them in great numbers, but, as they saw it, also for sometimes mutilating and desecrating the bodies of the fallen for a little more than a bizarre bridal dowry. His own father-in-law hated him. At least one of his wives despised and betrayed him. One of his sons led a revolution against him, and would have executed him had not more loyal souls intervened. David caused a devastating plague, and like a mafia don, ordered the execution of his enemies while on his deathbed. Yet he was also a spirit-sensitive poet, whose words have comforted millions worldwide in 2 major religions for 3,000 years. He was a musician whose songs could soothe a demon-haunted soul. He was a political leader, strong enough to forge a single nation out of disparate tribes that had been ripped apart for years by civil war and internecine prejudice. Not least of all, David was a man of passionate loyalty, great faith, and national vision. The name of this ancient Jewish king is known where the Bible is not even read or believed. We must remember, though, that David was not a 21st century Christian. If we try to dress him in a suit and tie and apply our standards of morality to his life, it simply won't work. Jesus' teachings on loving your enemies? After David. Paul's writings on marriage, specifically monogamy? After David. Peter's call to not repay evil with evil? You get the point. The story of the real David, the one I want to introduce you to, the one the Bible describes, could only be found in the adult graphic novel section of your comic book store. There would be no bright colors, capes, or pretty girls being rescued. That's not the Bible's David. The real David steals the pretty girls from their husbands. The real David makes a mess of his family. The real David breaks the laws of both God and man. We need to de-comic book